The war in Ukraine shows no sign of slowing down. Each night, skies are lit up by explosions as Russian drones and missiles cross the border, striking Ukrainian cities and villages. The human cost is staggering. Thousands of lives have been lost, and the destruction has left scars that will last for generations. Yet, behind the smoke and the rubble, one truth stands out. This war is not only fought with weapons, it is also fueled by money. Money that keeps Russia's war machine alive. And that is why many experts in Ukrainian voices now argue, if the world wants to stop Vladimir Putin, it must target his economy, his energy, and his war chest. The current reality on the ground, the war, now deep into its third year of large-scale fighting, continues to claim lives every single day. In Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, missile alarms are a routine part of life. For families living near the border regions, nighttime often means fear, rushing to shelters and hoping to survive until morning. Russia launches hundreds of drones and missiles across Ukraine every week, while Ukraine responds with counterattacks and drone strikes of its own. Despite repeated attempts at diplomacy and multiple rounds of talks between Moscow and other world powers, there are no real signs of peace on the horizon. President Vladimir Putin continues to press forward with his campaign of aggression, while Ukrainian leaders call for stronger international support to defend their sovereignty. The call to target Russia's economy among the many voices speaking out against Russia's ongoing aggression is Svitlana Romanko, the founder and director of Razum We Stand, a Ukrainian organization that focuses on climate justice and energy independence. She argues that the fastest way to cripple Russia's ability to wage war is not through more weapons, but through financial pressure. In a recent op-ed for the Kyiv Independent, Romanko called for a complete embargo on Russian fossil fuels and an end to global investment in Russia's oil and gas sector. Her reasoning is straightforward. Russia's economy relies heavily on energy exports. Without the billions earned from selling oil and gas, Putin's government would lose the resources needed to fund recruitment, weapons production, and the construction of military infrastructure. According to Romanko, only by cutting off this financial lifeline can Ukraine's allies bring the war closer to an end. She stressed that Ukrainians want a just and lasting peace, not endless battles and broken promises. Russia's escalation and broken promises, while some world leaders still hold out hope that peace talks could eventually lead to a ceasefire, Putin's actions tell another story. Russia has repeatedly escalated attacks, striking not only Ukrainian military targets but also civilian infrastructure and diplomatic buildings. One notable example was the attack on Kyiv that damaged the building housing the European Union's mission to Ukraine. This was seen as a direct violation of international law, specifically the Vienna Convention. The attack killed 8 people, including a child, sending yet another message that Putin has no serious intention of ending the war peacefully. Even after meeting with former U.S. President Donald Trump in Alaska, a meeting that ended with optimistic statements from Trump about the possibility of peace, Russia intensified its assault. Missiles kept falling and casualties continued to mount. The pattern has become clear. Putin says one thing but does another. Why sanctions matter? The argument from Romanko and others is simple. Talking to Putin is not working. He knows how to manipulate conversations, make promises he doesn't intend to keep, and shift the narrative in his favor. That is why stronger economic measures are needed. Since the start of the war, Western nations have already introduced thousands of sanctions on Russia. Banks were cut off from the SWIFT payment system, freezing international transactions. Russian central bank assets were frozen, amounting to nearly $1 trillion within just days of the invasion. International corporations left the Russian market, and trade restrictions were imposed across multiple industries. Oil sanctions have also played a significant role. In December 2022, a price cap of $60 per barrel was placed on Russian crude oil. The European Union also banned the import of crude and refined products, leading to a sharp decline in Russia's sales to Europe. Over 2023 and 2024, further restrictions followed, targeting products like diesel, gasoline, and fuel oil. By 2025, sanctions had reached their 18th wave, hitting Russian banks, energy firms, and even the Nord Stream pipeline. The group of 7 G7 countries also created the Air Loans for Ukraine initiative, redirecting profits from frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine's defense. Billions of dollars have been funneled into Kyiv through this program, directly weakening Russia while strengthening Ukraine's resistance. Impact on Russia's economy. These sanctions are taking a toll. Russia's economy, which once boasted steady growth, is now showing signs of deep trouble. Defense spending has skyrocketed. from $102 billion in 2022 to $149 billion in 2024. Such levels are not sustainable, even for a resource-rich nation like Russia. At the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in June 2025, Russia's own Minister for Economic Development admitted that the country was on the brink of recession. The central bank's latest forecast suggested zero growth by the end of the year. Russia's national wealth fund, once worth $135 billion, has fallen to just $35 billion. Inflation is hitting ordinary Russian families hard. Prices for basic groceries and household goods have nearly doubled since the war began. Meanwhile, the labor force has shrunk drastically due to mobilization, with over 1 million Russians killed or injured in the fighting. Despite these struggles, Putin has continued to push money into the war, showing little regard for the long-term economic damage being done to his own people. Energy exports. The lifeline that remains the problem, however, is that Russia's energy sector is still functioning. Oil, gas, and coal exports remain the backbone of the economy, and countries like China and India have increased their purchases since the war began. Turkey and Brazil have also become significant buyers, while the European Union, despite sanctions, remains the largest customer for Russian liquefied natural gas. This continued flow of money gives Russia the resources it needs to keep the war machine running. For this reason, experts like Romanko argue that the next stage of sanctions must go further. The push for stronger sanctions. Romanko has been clear in her demands. Europe must impose a full embargo on Russian fossil fuels. The oil price cap should be lowered drastically to between $20 and $25 per barrel, levels that would truly hurt Moscow. LNG projects like Arctic LNG 2 must be blocked, and the shadow fleet of Russian oil tankers dismantled through stricter enforcement and transparency. She also calls for secondary sanctions not only on Russia but also on the countries that continue to trade with it. This means applying pressure on China, India, and other major buyers to stop enabling Putin's war. Finally, Romanko argues that Europe must look inward and reduce its overall dependency on fossil fuels, replacing them with renewables. Otherwise, the cycle of dependency on authoritarian regimes will simply repeat itself. Why this matters now? The logic behind these demands is simple. Wars are expensive. Russia cannot continue to pour money into drones, missiles, and soldiers indefinitely. The longer the war drags on, the more resources are consumed. If those resources are cut off at the source through energy sanctions, the Kremlin will find it much harder to sustain the conflict. Ukraine itself has recognized this, often targeting Russian oil refineries, fuel depots, and other high-value economic assets with its own drone and missile strikes. Each successful strike forces Russia to spend money it cannot afford on repairs and replacements. The future of the war, even with its economic struggles, Russia continues to push forward with a war of attrition. Putin's strategy is to wear down Ukraine, outlast Western patience, and keep up the pressure until cracks begin to appear in Kyiv's support system. But this strategy carries risks. Experts estimate it could take years and millions more casualties for Russia to capture the territories it has already claimed, let alone the rest of Ukraine. Many believe that Putin is gambling on the idea that Western nations will hesitate to push harder, leaving him enough room to maneuver with support from allies like China and India. The next steps for Europe, and the world diplomats in Europe have hinted the 19th round of sanctions may not include major new restrictions on energy, instead focusing on shadow fleets and sanction loopholes. If true, this may not be enough to deal a decisive blow to Russia's economy. Romanko insists that this is a mistake. She says Europe must act boldly, cutting fossil fuel imports completely, investing more in renewables, and tightening the financial screws on Putin's regime. Every euro denied to Moscow is one less missile, one less drone, and one less life lost in Ukraine. Conclusion: the war in Ukraine has now become more than just a battle for land. It is a test of endurance, resilience, and strategy. While Putin remains determined to press ahead, Ukraine and its allies believe that economic warfare may be the key to forcing him to stop. Sanctions have already shaken the Russian economy, but they have not yet gone far enough. The coming months will be critical. If Europe and the wider international community can summon the will to strike harder at Russia's energy sector, they may finally cut off the lifeline that fuels the Kremlin's war chest. As Romanko and many others remind us, peace will not come from endless talks with a leader who has broken promises time and again. Peace will come when the financial foundation of Russia's war is shattered, making it impossible for Putin to continue. Until then, the people of Ukraine will continue to endure the bombs, the missiles, and the devastating cost of a war they never asked for.